Now that we've explored the world of wigs, let's dive into something that may sound less glamorous, but is equally strange: the laws governing public displays of affection, or, more specifically, the lack thereof. In 18th century France, even love, in its most innocent and private forms, was regulated by the state. Sounds odd, right? How could love be something to be policed? But in a society where appearances were everything and moral codes were strict, displaying affection in public could land you in serious trouble. The government had a peculiar obsession with policing the behavior of its citizens in public spaces, and love, it seems, was no exception. Historians still debate whether this was an attempt to enforce moral propriety or simply a tool to maintain control over the social lives of the population. Some argue that these laws were put in place to prevent the disruption of public order, while others suggest that it was more about preserving the sanctity of the family unit and promoting social discipline. Regardless of the reasoning behind it, the restrictions on public displays of affection were incredibly specific and strange. Picture yourself as a young couple, sitting in a public park in Paris, enjoying a quiet moment together. You exchange a gentle kiss, nothing too extreme, just a soft brush of lips. You think nothing of it, until, suddenly, a stern-looking officer approaches. You freeze, heart racing. He's about to inform you that such behavior is unlawful. In fact, it's a crime to kiss in public. While this may seem entirely absurd today, it wasn't so long ago that the French government took such matters seriously. The laws were even more restrictive when it came to unmarried couples. If you were caught engaging in any form of public affection, whether a kiss, a hug, or a handhold, you could be fined or even imprisoned. The reasoning behind this law was that public displays of affection were seen as a form of moral decay, a threat to public order. They were thought to be distracting, inappropriate, and likely to lead to even worse behavior, like perhaps illicit sexual activity. And this wasn't just a law limited to one region of France. It was widespread, part of the state's larger attempts to regulate the moral lives of its people. But the truly bizarre part of this law comes in when you consider the punishments. What do you think would happen if you were caught kissing in a public square? Well, it wasn't as simple as a fine or a warning. In some instances, public displays of affection were punished by making the offenders stand in the middle of the square for hours, facing the judgmental gaze of passersby. This type of public humiliation served as a warning to others, ensuring that no one else dared to step out of line. Historians argue about how strictly this law was enforced, whether it was mostly symbolic or actually a major part of everyday life. Some believe it was more about societal pressure than actual legal action, and that only the most overt displays of affection were punished. Yet others suggest that this was an issue that caused a great deal of anxiety among young couples, especially those in more rural or conservative areas, where moral codes were enforced with even greater intensity. There was also an element of hypocrisy involved in these laws. The aristocracy, with all their pomp and privilege, were known to engage in public displays of affection in their private circles. Yet in many cases, they were exempt from the punishments that applied to the general public. This created a strange dynamic where the rich could kiss and embrace freely, while the commoners were expected to maintain decorum at all times. This double standard further widened the gap between the classes, as it created a culture where the privileged could flaunt their love, while the rest had to keep their affections under strict control. What's even more puzzling is that, despite these strict regulations, the laws surrounding public affection didn't seem to stop people from breaking the rules. French society has always had a reputation for its passion and romance. And even in an environment of strict regulations, couples found ways to express their feelings. This cultural dichotomy, where passion was simultaneously stifled by law but celebrated in hidden corners, demonstrates just how complicated the relationships between the state and its citizens could be. But beyond the personal dramas of couples, these laws were part of a larger attempt by the monarchy to maintain order in society. The French Revolution was, after all, just around the corner, and unrest was brewing in the streets. So, it's not hard to imagine that the monarchy might have viewed public affection as a symbol of the growing divide between the people and the ruling classes. As strange as it seems, Perhaps these laws were an early attempt to clamp down on any perceived public disorder, no matter how innocent it might appear. In the end, the laws regulating public affection were just another bizarre facet of French life in the 18th century. They weren't about the actual act of love. They were about control. The state wanted to ensure that public morality remained proper, even if that meant forcing people to hide their feelings and interactions behind closed doors. And though these laws seem strange from a modern perspective, they serve as a reminder of how a government's obsession with propriety and order can seep into the most intimate corners of people's lives.